Hello and welcome to this special bonus episode of the Star Wars Universe podcast. Today we are talking about the video game Fallen Order and what its story tells us about the Star Wars universe. All that and more with Riki and Sarah Hayashi after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back, folks. I'm Matthew. I'm your host. As I said, this is going to be a bit of a special bonus episode. The Star Wars Universe podcast is every week going to be covering The Bad Batch in partnership with the Animation Liberation podcast. We're going to be doing live recordings of our podcast at 9 a.m. Central Time on the Stranded Panda TV Twitch channel. So that'll be a time if you want to tune in there and ask questions or give feedback. Or, of course, it'll always be showing up in your podcast feed. But because there's so much else going on in the Star Wars universe, and I wanted to keep talking about other things, we're going to probably, a couple of weeks during those 2 or 3 months, we'll still have some bonus episodes about other things. Knowing me, that's probably going to wind up being every other week, if not actually every week, but I'm going to try to keep it to just a couple. But today we're going to dive into something we've been talking about for a long time, and it's a little bit of a departure, but that's kind of what we're going to be talking about because Disney and Star Wars have made it very clear that this is a canonical story. And so we're going to talk about the story and about what it means to have a story told in a video game format. And, of course, we're talking about the game Fallen Order that came out, I think, about 6 months ago or so now, but it's been quite popular. And I have played my way through it. And Riki and Sarah, I know you have watched replays of it and cutscenes of it. So how are you folks doing today? And how are you feeling about talking about this game today?
Didn't it come out in 2019?
Time is a squibbly, wobbly, bobbly thing.
You just ignore 2020 and then it came out.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Good. I think we referenced Fallen Order a couple times talking about the Clone Wars. So it's nice to sit down and just talk about it. As you mentioned, when it came out, we watched a YouTuber, the Rad Brad, shout out, do his playthrough of it. And then just recently we watched a compilation of cutscenes sort of cut together as a movie for it.
Right. Yeah, and I would say I probably half watched, half played it, because as I've commented before, I'm not much of a video game person, and this is a hard video game, and we'll be talking about the significance of that later, but I'd say about half the game I played through, and then I'd get to a really difficult part and hand the joystick to my partner, who's much better with those things, and say, help. And as the game went on, the number of times I said help, and she just sort of took over for an hour or two, or got more and more, but either way, I experienced the whole game. And I think I like what you brought up there, which is that, it used to be sometimes you'd get a story like this and maybe it'd be canonical, maybe it wouldn't be, but either way, it was so obscure that it didn't really matter. This is a story about, what happens to members of the Jedi after Order 66. This is a story about Inquisitors, and we haven't had any of the plot moments of it, I believe, directly referenced in other canon yet, but I certainly think it's very possible, and if you're listening to, or if you're taking part in any discussions about Star Wars, there's certainly a lot of people calling for some of these moments to become part of the story. So I think it's important enough that we wanted to get into it. And the idea here is that if you've played the game, hopefully you're going to really enjoy our conversation and have your own thoughts, and you can let us know about those. But especially for those who haven't played through the game, we will be spoiling it all. So if you want to go play the game, if you like platformers, it's a very good platformer, I've heard. I'm not a platformer fan myself, but that's another story. But if you haven't played the game, you're not really sure you're going to, but you still want to hear us talk about the story, then this is also the episode for you. And so with that, let's first of all mostly focus on the story. We'll talk about it being a video game a bit towards the end. But in terms of the story itself, can either of you give kind of a quick summary of what happens in the story?
My goodness, this is a long game, so I don't know if a quick summary is...
We don't have to go to just hit the major details.
Yeah, so we're starting, 5 years after what they're calling the Purge, which is Order 66.
Yep.
And we start off with our main character, Cal Kestis, who is working in a scrapyard. A group of Inquisitors come, who are, characters we're first introduced to. They look like stormtroopers. They're dressed in all black. They're like the Numbered Sisters, which is pretty interesting. They come, they're looking for Jedi. Cal ends up revealing himself to be a Jedi and kind of goes on the run, meets up with another escaped Jedi or former Jedi, Seer, and her captain, Grease, and they're on the hunt for a holocron, which has the list of names of Force-sensitive children.
Right.
So yeah, Cal meets up with the droid of another former Jedi, Cordova. Thank you. And then Cal sort of tracks those leads throughout the galaxy, including stops like Kashyyyk, Dathomir. Does he actually go to Omicron? He meets Saw on Kashyyyk. Okay. Right. Eventually finds the holocron. Gets it away from the Inquisitors. We end up finding out that one of the Inquisitors is Seer's former Padawan. We get a fun little Darth Vader cameo, and then Cal decides that it's best to destroy the holocron, and if these Force-sensitive kids want to join the Force and want to help rebuild the Jedi, then the Force will come to them. They're not going to go hunt after them.
Right. Yeah, I think that hits the main details. There's obviously a lot more story that goes into. We get a lot of stuff about the Night Sisters and on Dathomir. We get to meet some other fallen Jedi. I think some of the most important things for our story, though, is we learn about the whole process of people becoming Inquisitors. The Inquisitors are important parts of the Rebels storyline. I'm guessing they're going to appear somewhat in Bad Batch. We've basically gotten the idea that they're the ones who've been hunting down rogue Jedi ever since Order 66 under Darth Vader's control. And we find out that a lot of them are themselves former Jedi who were taken or converted or turned to the dark side or through torture or whatever it might be. And we also get a lot of discussion about why the Jedi fell and sort of what would it mean to rebuild the Jedi in ways that I think are pretty interesting. So, a lot to talk about here. And let's just start kind of basic. What do you all think of the story?
Oh, this is my favorite era of Star Wars. It's the in-between the prequels and the original series.
Mm-hmm.
So I just like filling in the gaps of this period and finding out what the Empire was doing and how, some Jedi survived.
Yeah.
Especially the Inquisitors. So the Inquisitors are Force-sensitive, dark side users, often ex-Jedi who have been corrupted to the dark side. So I don't think we'll get to see them in the Bad Batch unless there's some kind of time jump. Because it would be a little too quick for them to establish this order of Inquisitors.
That's fair.
Yeah, we do run into them in Rebels, which we're going to be talking about later.
Yeah,
right. I really liked the story as well. I think it's because it's so long, like we do get a little more in depth with a lot of really fun elements. Like, the Night Sisters on Dathomir was really cool. So I watched Fallen Order before I watched Clone Wars. So I think cool. Coming into Clone Wars being like, oh, okay, I recognize the Night Sisters. Oh, okay, I recognize this like Kyber crystal search.
Ilum.
And Ilum, yeah. And so seeing those moments, and in Clone Wars, the show, we kind of move through them maybe a little quicker or don't get as involved with them. Whereas in this game, we get a little more exploration of that, which I thought was really cool.
And as Sarah mentioned, we do meet up with Saw Gerrera again.
Yep.
And in 5 years since the end of Clone Wars, he is aged up dramatically to be played by Forrest Whitaker, which is probably even more of a dramatic age up than Obi-Wan goes through on Tatooine.
Warfare can do terrible things to you. Different planets have different atmospheres. Those UV lights or UV rays are going to get to you.
Yeah. How does time work, right? It's different. Space-time, et cetera, et cetera.
Relativity in space. I mean, all the concepts of time shouldn't make any sense anyway. So, traveling that often at light speed. Well, I'm glad you really like the story. I think I had more mixed feelings about it. And part of that maybe also because I was playing it instead of just getting to watch it. And I found that experience kind of frustrating. I love the world building. And I think you both referenced this. I feel like what we learned about the story about like the whole nature of the Inquisitors and just getting to spend more time with the idea of, I think you watch Revenge of the Sith, it's possible to think like all the Jedi except Obi-Wan and Yoda and maybe one or two others were all killed within like 48 hours. Yeah. And part of what I think this really goes through is that no, like a lot of them did escape. And the next 5 or 10 years of time after the Purge was just spent like hunting down the last of the rogue Jedi and killing them. Making the line in A New Hope about how the Jedi are a the Force is a forgotten and ancient religion make less and less sense, but the canonicity of that line, I think, has already been blown out of the water. So I think there's so much great stuff we learn about the world. I have to say, though, I found the main story itself not very compelling. In part because, and I'm kind of, maybe you all had a different read on this, Cal Kestis, the Jedi antagonist who's our hero and the person you're playing as, felt like such a boring, white bread, completely has no defining personality characteristics except he's sad about his master dying and he wants to rebuild the Jedi. I just found him so utterly uncompelling as a character that I think that was the storyline of like, will we undo these clues and puzzles? To me, that never really grabbed me. But the world building itself, I did think was absolutely fantastic.
I liked Cal, but I think there's definitely a difference between like player character in a video game versus main character in a storyline.
That's fair.
Where I think there is some like neutral masking going on with player characters. They leave it like a bit, I guess what you might describe as bland, like a little less personality to allow the player to sort of put themselves in that role.
That's fair.
But I mean, I don't know. I liked Cal. I liked how we got to see his relationship with his master, Jaro Tapal, in those sort of like flashbacks, and they seem to be used as almost like tutorials for new skills that you could do in the game. Like, we haven't played it, but that's what it looks
That's exactly
like.
what happens, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought that sort of the relationship between Master and Padawan, and then even at the very beginning, Cal is there's another character on I think is it Braca, the planet that they're on that they start with.
I believe that's true, yeah. And here another fun bit of world building. What they're doing is basically taking apart all of the old Republic ships from the Clone Wars. And the implication is like they're basically like recycling parts to be able to use to rebuild the Imperial Navy.
Yeah, they're scrappers, which is like interesting. And he's got a sort of like father figure on that scrapyard, and he first ends up using the Force in order to save him when they are out doing like a reconnaissance on some ship far away, and some stuff goes down. But yeah, so seeing that like hunt for a father figure, hunt for a master, because Cal was just a Padawan when Order 66 happened.
Right.
Like he was quite young, and now he's, I don't know, like 20 something. But grew up without a master, still with this like waning connection to the Force. Like he still has a bit of a connection, but it sort of grows and strengthens as the game progresses.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know. I liked those aspects of him. I didn't find him particularly bland, and I think
That's
like
fair.
BD1 does a lot of good support work in there too. Just
Yeah, BD1 is a
little droid. Yeah.
a little droid he picks up as a companion, and he serves as both a person he can talk to and exposition at, but also he's your sort of like, he slices, he dices, he makes julienne fries. He does a lot of like cool things in the game to give you like tech support, which is it's a fun game mechanic for sure, and he's a great character.
Mickey?
Well, I love the character of Cal Kestis.
Okay.
And I also just in general, like I talked about how this was my favorite period, and the way that they are developing the continuation of the Jedi storylines. Mm-hmm. Here we have Cal. We just saw in the Bad Batch Kanan, or I guess Caleb, escape thanks to the actions of the Bad Batch. And we know he becomes an important part of the Rebels cartoon. Mm-hmm. And then Ahsoka also. So you have 3 Padawans who have escaped the Purge and now have this burden to carry on the Jedi legacy without fully understanding or embracing that legacy for various reasons.
Right.
And I think that's an excellent storytelling technique here, like in the big picture, because, you know, as we find out in The Last Jedi and all that, the legacy of the Jedi in some sense was failure, right?
Yeah.
And so these young Padawans have to reckon with that failure, but also they don't have to be burdened with it because they weren't responsible as much for that failure.
No, I'm really glad you brought up that, especially the relationship between Master and Padawan, because we do see a number of good examples of that in some of the stories you're bringing up. And certainly a couple of times now we've seen a master sacrifice themselves to protect the Padawan. And you can get into all sorts of questions about whether that should be done or not. But I think then we also get the flip side of it, because there's one other Padawan who did survive, and that's Trilla, who, as we learned, was the Padawan of Seer. And as the story goes, Seer goes out to, tells Trilla to stay safe, to not go out. Seer is going to try and go out. Seer gets captured. Seer gets tortured. And while she's being tortured, she gives up the information of where her Padawan can be found. And so Trilla is captured, and, it's kind of the we've seen all these great examples of masters protecting their Padawans, and thus the Padawans being able to keep up the Jedi legacy. In a case we get where the Jedi didn't do that, and Trilla, the Padawan, was captured, she becomes an Inquisitor. And she, the second sister, becomes kind of the primary antagonist. And I really loved her story with Seer, because I thought it was such a good counterpoint to what you're talking about there, of we see both the success, but also the real breakdown that happens, and where that sense of betrayal can lead you if as a Padawan you don't make it.
Yeah, and also while kind of doing research on this, there's a fan theory that has not been confirmed or denied in any way, that Barriss Offee, the Padawan who betrayed Ahsoka during season 5 of the Clone Wars, might be another Inquisitor. I think the Ninth Sister, who shows up in Rebels.
No, the Ninth Sister is in this video game. She's the big yellow.
Sixth. Okay, right. It's the Sixth Sister then. Yeah.
Right. The Ninth Sister, I think, gets eaten by a dragon or something like that. Her ship gets crashed.
So that's the flip side, is that Padawans who perhaps felt betrayed by their masters or saw the corruption of the Jedi fall easier and then are taken in by the Inquisitor Order. Right.
Which also makes, I'm really excited that at some point we're going to get to see more of Ahsoka's story during this time, because I think it makes even more the fact that she didn't do any of that, even though she'd been pretty badly betrayed by the Jedi. All the more remarkable story that she doesn't turn in any way.
Yeah, but she had her sort of abandonment pre-purge as well, right? So I don't think anyone was actively courting Ahsoka from the dark side, right?
Right.
Because she had already left the Order by that time. And I do in season 7, we do get to see sort of what she's like post Jedi Order, and then we get to see her again in Mandalorian. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder if obviously Anakin probably wouldn't have gone after her, or maybe he would have. That would be interesting. But what would have happened if she did get abandoned, post purge, in the same way that Trilla did? And I guess Barriss to an extent, although Barriss seemed pretty disillusioned beforehand as well, right?
Yeah. And just tying it back a bit to the character we started with, I'm really glad to hear you all had a better perspective on Cal than I did, or at least a different perspective, because so many people have been calling for, people thought that Cal might be the one to show up at the end of Mandalorian season 2. People were really excited for him to show up in other things, and I was honestly kind of baffled by that, because I just didn't connect with the character. But I'm really glad to hear that others did, and that gives me a lot of ideas. I will also say it is the best ginger representation I've seen in Star Wars. He is very much a redhead, and we don't get to see that very often, so that alone made me pretty happy.
Yeah. I think there might also be an element of we didn't have any frustrations playing him because we weren't playing him, right?
I had Cal jump off a cliff 80 million times because I didn't hit the button at the exact right time. So yes, that's also very possible.
Right? Just why are you sliding into oblivion when I told you not to do that? So you just get angry at him? Yeah.
That's certainly very possible. And I'll also say, as someone who hasn't played many video games or watched many video games, I like Sarah, the comment that you made about how a player character is often going to be a little bit more of a blank slate, so that the actual person playing the game can put a little bit more of their personality onto that character. And so maybe that's also, since that's not a dynamic I'm used to, that maybe it should be something I missed entirely.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier about Resident Evil 8, because the main character that you play, Ethan Winters, you never see his face. It's all a first person, your camera is in your eyes perspective, and there's never any cutscenes where you see Ethan's face. And we were talking about how that that is a way for people to be able to immerse more fully with this character from the first person perspective. Whereas in this game, not only is it like a first person like behind,
it's third person.
Third person behind him. There's also just cutscenes where you see him from a third person perspective.
Right. That totally makes sense. And honestly, it does make me wonder if we ever see this character in live action, and they cast someone, how many people who play the game are going to be like, no, that's not what Cal's supposed to be like, because they've, had their own image of Cal from playing the character.
Yeah. Well, there is, I
feel like
the
it's
actor...
Just, most of these they just model the characters after the people, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's just like motion capture. Yeah. Cameron Monaghan is the actor, and it looks...
Sounds ginger.
He sounds ginger. Yeah, and he just
Irish.
Looks exact.
Yeah,
they just stick the dots on his face, and
the Jedi Master character of Eno Cordova is played by someone, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's quite famous in like sci-fi circles. Like he's been on a lot of TV series.
And Cameron Monaghan, the actor who's playing Cal Kestis, he's been in quite a lot. He was a major character in Shameless, and for more in kind of our own in more genre world. If you've seen the TV show Gotham, he plays the character who's kind of a possible inspiration for Joker type character. So he definitely has some acting chops under his belt. So let's talk about the characters of Cere and Trilla, because I think their storylines are so intertwined that we can kind of talk about them really at the same time. And I think we both kind of briefly alluded to it, but just their story really is so emblematic of all these questions about the legacy of the Jedi and the Inquisitors and how that story comes about. How do you guys feel about those two characters?
So I think I was most disappointed by Cere as a character. Because here we get a Jedi character, a woman, person of color, a woman of color, and yet she's given this like very down storyline of failure, right? And she doesn't really use the Force until the very end, so she's not portrayed in the powerful Jedi tradition, and it's just, I don't know, it was kind of a downer, especially for that kind of representation.
Yeah, I had similar feelings. I guess I liked Cere, but the fact that she had cut herself off completely from the Force, like she didn't. When we've encountered other Jedi who are like no longer Jedi, but like still are, there's like a certain, I don't know, aura about them, like Old Man Obi-Wan, and even like the creepy guy in the desert at Dathomir. Malicos, thanks, who's a former Jedi. Like they have a certain like I used to be a Jedi vibe, and I feel like we didn't get that from Cere. She was just like a sad lady.
Yeah.
And then, like, her reasoning is, like, after she betrayed Trilla, she, like, completely cut herself off from the Force because she ended up tapping into the dark side and just didn't trust herself not to go there again, so she just cut it off completely. But, like, I don't know, even in the flashbacks when we see Cere as a Jedi, I still didn't really believe in her as a Jedi, let alone, like, a Jedi Master.
Yeah. I think I got kind of a similar feeling, and I wonder if it's because... like, you only find out that she was a former Jedi, like, more and more of her story gets told over the course of the game. But at first, she seems like she's just, kind of like someone on a freighter or a smuggler ship or something like that. And so I wonder if part of it was that it's supposed to be kind of a surprise that she's a Jedi. But I think you're right that they went a little bit too far with that. And to me, I've had very mixed feelings because I love the aspect of the story that we get between her and Trilla. But I think I like Trilla's character much, much more. Yeah. Because you're right. I think Cere, it just felt... And again, I don't know how much this was video game dynamics, that she's very much supposed to just be kind of an NPC. Like, I feel like on some level, if she has that Jedi aura, then on some level you're wondering, why isn't she doing this instead of Cal? But so it kind of felt like I understood why they had to do that contrivance of making her... very sort of nerfed, but it also felt very much like a contrivance. And I wish they'd done, especially because, as you say, as you pointed out, Riki, having her be the first kind of woman of color Jedi we get in a major role, at least as far as I can remember right now, it would have been a lot nicer to have her have a more significant role.
So I was thinking about that, what you just said, and I think part of the issue is that when Cal, we talked about earlier how he levels up, some Force ability, it's done through a flashback to his old master, Jaro Tapal, teaching him some lesson in the training room. Right. And I think it would have been nice to have some scene with Cal and Seer where she teaches him something.
Yeah. Yeah, if maybe like halfway through the story, she had sort of started to embrace her role again.
Yeah.
And you could have maybe had her like, maybe she was so physically injured by the torture she went through that's why she can't be the one to physically go on these missions and things like that. Yeah, I think that could have made it a much stronger story.
For sure. And or like even like she's still cut off from the Force, but she can still like talk Cal through some stuff.
Right.
Would make sense, but she didn't like. So the other character on the ship, Grease, who's like the captain / avid gambler.
Yeah.
/ cook.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like the dude that Seer has hired to cart them around. Like I didn't get much of a different vibe from either of them, right? They both have this like sort of pseudo-parental role with Cal, but like in a very like we're bad parents kind of way.
Yeah.
Like Seer with her sort of like refusal to even approach Force subjects with Cal, and then Grease with his selling him into gladiatorial combat, which I guess is my like that's if we have a gripes section at the end, that's where I'm going. But yeah. I think her character could have been handled differently. Like she didn't feel like a Jedi, but in order to get that twist of, oh, the second sister is your pal's old Padawan, she needs to be a Jedi. So there's just this like mismatch, and I think you guys are both totally right. There was a different way of handling her.
Yeah.
Being a Jedi and feeling like one without making her seem overpowered.
I also felt like, on the one hand, they wanted to give you the sense of betrayal, but they also didn't want it to be bad enough that she couldn't be redeemed, because, like, clearly the end is setting up for a sequel in which she is now more of an active Jedi, because she joins in the fight against Vader and is an important part of it at the very end. To me, it's also where the story falls down a bit, because, yes, if you're a Padawan, like, we have all of these stories throughout the Jedi, whether it's Obi-Wan or not Obi-Wan, but like all the Jedi who get captured in various movies or TV shows, and you torture them and you torture them and you torture them and they never talk. And that's a great, great, like, aspiration, to be sure. But if you tell me someone completely betrayed me and allowed me to be captured by the dark side, by the Sith, by Darth Vader, and I was like, okay, oh, that's horrible. What did they do? And you tell me that under the absolute, worst possible physical, mental, psychic tortures that the Empire plus Vader plus the Emperor or whatever, could come up with, that to me doesn't feel like a betrayal. It feels like I wish you could have been stronger, but that doesn't feel to me like someone gave you 30 pieces of silver and said, here's where to go find my Padawan. Am I off base there, or does it seem like you gave up the secret under incredibly awful torture isn't quite the horrible betrayal that it seems to be made out to be?
They're not going to tell you that.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing I was going to say. Like, that's the perfect information version, which I think is why we're able to redeem Seer, because it was this incredible torture, right? So having perfect information, like, we don't think it's that bad. But I'm assuming, like, they told Trilla, like, we barely poked her and she gave you up instantly.
I think I agree with you there, but I feel like the story never lets you connect that dot, because the story is very clear that Seer horribly betrayed her, and like there's never a moment where Cal says like, you were under Imperial torture, like of course you gave that up. There's never a moment of that sympathy.
I thought there was.
Well, there's like he confronts her. I mean, so immediately after the reveal, when we learn that the second sister is Trilla, and Trilla's like, guess who my master is?
Right.
And then she leaves. Then Cal gets abducted by this gambling ring gladiatorial battle thing. When he gets back to the ship, he confronts Seer about it, and she was basically just like, yeah, I was tortured. And then like near the very end of the story, I think like right before the Vader battle, you get to see the like her leaving Trilla in the cave and going, and then I think, I don't know, like I remember it being more implied that it was like super, super hard torture, but I don't know if anybody actually said it. I don't quite recall. Do you remember something, Riki? You look like you remember.
I mean, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they don't actually show it, right? It's just implied.
They do.
They do? Okay.
Yeah.
Did I just block it out of my mind? Cool.
And I'll also say I saw this story over a course of probably 3 or 4 months. So it's also very possible that I some parts of it I just have forgotten because I played. I would play the game for a couple hours, put it away, come back a week later, that kind of a thing. So that's
it's a
possible.
it's a long story for sure.
Well, so let's then switch to Trilla, because I think the real power of the story between the two of them comes from her character and what we learn from her.
Well, my minor complaint about Trilla is, why is she the second sister? I don't know. So I don't actually know if they're ordered
numerically
by rank.
Yeah.
And if you can rank up. That's always what I kind of assumed. And so like her being second sister, so is it the ninth?
Ninth sister is the other one.
Ninth sister apparently is an actual former Jedi. And
right, not
a
even an actual Padawan, you're right.
So I was like, why isn't she the second sister?
Yeah.
Maybe it's like the top number is the highest.
And in order to get to the bottom of this, I've actually put in an order at my library for the Darth Vader, I think it's called Lord of the Sith comic books, which introduces more of the backstory of the Inquisitors. So I'll get back to you on that part.
Delightful.
Okay, I'll look forward to that. So beyond that gripe, do you like the character? Do you also find her kind of frustrating?
She's okay. I mean, I like her quips and her trash talking during the fights.
Yeah. That's always fun.
Yeah, I don't know. It's another thing. Like, she's also a woman of color, right? And we get that it seems like she quickly bought into this Seer betrayed you thing.
Right.
And I don't know. She was relatively young and probably susceptible to the dark side and them their persuasions, them torturing her. But yeah, I don't know. It felt like, yeah, she was just on this revenge mission against Seer for betraying her. But even then, like you were saying, Matthew, the idea that this torture must have been immense in order for her to betray her, didn't really seem to cross her mind. I don't know.
She also leaves her though. In the scene that they show, in the scene where they show Seer is in the torture chamber, and then Trilla comes, and it's from her perspective, and this is when they first give her the Inquisitor helmet, the cool helmet that she wears.
Okay.
And then that's when Seer is like, no, and gets mad because it's clear that she's fallen to the dark side, and blows everything up and escapes, and just leaves her there, injured probably. So I think that there was a first betrayal, and then there's the second betrayal.
Okay, you saw that they were taking me, and you just escaped for yourself instead of trying to save me. That makes sense.
It's interesting that we have such different views on this, especially with the switch with Cal as well. I really like Trilla's character. I think especially because until now, we never really got to see. We never really learned much about the Inquisitors in Rebels. I mean, we see them being very evil and having good plans and plots, but we never really kind of have any sympathy or relatability to them. And I really liked getting to see that from Trilla, and getting to see, especially since we're kind of in this period, as you said, Riki, that the Jedi have fallen, and there's all these people out here who are using the Force. They're not quite sure where they fit. We also later meet another dark side user, but who's very much not a Sith or anything like that. And she's clearly, she's not an actual Sith, but she's on the side. She's working for Vader. But I liked getting to have a better, she's not a mustache twirler. We have a bit more of an understanding of where she's coming from. And to me, it really, the title is Fallen Order. And I feel like one of the themes of it is that it's not just that they fell because they were betrayed. It's that they sort of, all the stuff you and I, all three of us talked about during the Clone Wars shows, of all the things that went into the fall of the Jedi. And so I guess I just really like Trilla because I felt like she was a really good illustration of that, and of seeing if you were, taken from your parents at a very young age and raised by this group and told they'll take care of everything and they'll protect you, and here's this woman who's your master and she'll always keep you safe, and then she betrays you, and as you see it, at least, as you said, like, whether or not how much is an actual betrayal, I guess I just found her character incredibly relatable and her story very compelling.
Yeah. So do you think she's like part of the Inquisitor crusade? Like she truly believes in the like eliminate the Jedi cause, like the idea that the Jedi as an order, like what we were talking about with Clone Wars, kind of like grew almost too full of themselves and had too much power and became corrupt, like what Palpatine has been pushing. Like, do you think that Trilla believes that and that's why she's fighting to eliminate the Jedi?
I think she does, and here I'm going to admit this is a huge bit of headcanon for me, but it's one that I hope we get to see explored somewhere else. And I've been kind of reaching out and seeing other who have theories similar to this. More and more I think the story is willing to understand the idea that the Jedi were not perfect, and that maybe taking young children from their parents at age like 1 or 2 and raising them within what's basically a cult is not always the most healthy thing for, youth development. And in our own world, I a long time ago got really interested in cults and the psychology of it and stuff like that. And one of the things there's been a lot of studies of is if you have children who are raised in a very cult-like, atmosphere, and then, they leave that cult, they're now very, very susceptible for another cult, for another group that comes along and says, no, all of them were wrong, but actually we have all the answers and things like that. And that kind of bit of like psychological information kept coming to mind for me as I was playing through this game and thinking about if you were taken as a tiny child, you were raised by the Jedi, they were the only thing that gave you any worldview, and then all that comes crashing down, and along comes this other group, which is just as persuasive and just as much willing to be like, no, we're your family, we can make everything right for you, and we can tell you that all your sort of like buried feelings of resentment and anger, that they're real, give in to those because, that other group, they was terrible, but we're great. To me, that feels very, very believable. And I guess like that was never explicitly stated in Trilla's story, but I feel like to go through what she did, to then buy in hook, line, and sinker to the ideology of the next group that comes along seems very believable to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. The sort of like nature abhors a vacuum thing of like just replacing one cult with another. Right. And even, I guess the idea that she's not just doing this out of spite against Seer. Like she truly believes that the Jedi need to be eliminated in the way that we're supposed to think that Anakin believes that. Right. Like that makes more sense. Yeah. I like that. Cool. I don't like that, but I mean, I like that for her character, Yeah.
And just going one step deeper on this, there's a line that is said by, you mentioned before, Terran Malicos, who's a dark Jedi. The idea is that he was a full Jedi during the Purge. He escaped. He somehow crashed on Dathomir. And he's clearly turned more and more towards the dark side, and he's kind of been basically kind of running the Night Brothers on Dathomir as his own little private army and in conflict with the Night Sister. And he tries to sort of convince Cal to join him. And one of the things he said is, because Cal is saying, like, no, I'm going to rebuild the Order. It's just that the Jedi fell because of the Purge. And so Malicos says to him, the Jedi fell long before the Purge, stifled by tradition, deafened by past glories, blinded by endless wars. Is he wrong? Because I heard him saying that and was like, I think you're right, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I also thought that, but then, like, I don't know, giving the speech while showing off the crazy scars that you've given yourself and, like, I command an insane army isn't, like, the most convincing sounding. But yeah, like, I mean, it's the same themes that we've been talking about throughout Clone Wars, right? That, like, the Jedi are on the downward spiral at their own hand, kind of. Or, like, at Palpatine's gentle pushing.
Riki, what about you? What's your sense of that and how this plays into all the stuff that we're talking about the legacy of the Jedi?
Well, I mean, I think Malicos is right that the Jedi Order fell in that way. But But I have to question, like what that means for individual Jedi.
Right.
And I don't know. There's just, we talk so much about how the Jedi Order was bad and corrupt, but there are these individuals who were working within it who were very good and honorable, and I have very mixed feelings about this in the real world as well. The difference between a bad organization and the good people who are in it, perhaps trying to save that organization,
right,
or push it in a better direction, and are just being overwhelmed by the voices around them. I don't know anything like that in the real world.
No, it's quite a bunch. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good comparison, and I think that's why the story resonates so much, is because it's this idea of, and in part I think it's why, like, to me, Ahsoka's story is so interesting, because, you have people like Cal who are saying, like, there can be some good within the Jedi, and so we should rebuild the Jedi. And then someone like Ahsoka who, I don't think she's against rebuilding the Jedi, but she definitely doesn't say, like, well, the Jedi were, broken, but I'm still a Jedi. She's very clear, like, no, I'm something different now. And I think that's a really interesting, like, I want us to see that explored a lot more of what does it mean to be a light side using Force user in the world where the Jedi Order has fallen, and you're trying to figure out, like, as you said, like, if the organization was broken, how do you fall as an individual?
Yeah, well, I think we get similar sentiments from Luke in The Last Jedi.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That, like, the idea of the Jedi as, like, a bureaucratic institution is dead, but that doesn't mean that, like, the idea of the Jedi as an individual person tapping into the Force and this sort of spiritual entity has to die as well.
Because by the end of the movie, The Last Jedi, he comes around to saying, I will not be the last Jedi.
Yeah.
So he realizes that the tradition can continue in a different way.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think that's very true. And I think that's also an interesting part of the story, because I do feel like part of the story is Cal coming to understand that maybe the institution, it's like, at first it seems like he just wants to rebuild the institution exactly as it was. That's part of why he wants to find this list of the young Padawan, not even Padawans, but it's like the list of, like, the 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds who are Force sensitive, so that he can go and find them and try and, like, rebuild the Jedi exactly as they were. And to me, I really like that by the end of the story, I feel like he has at least accepted that, like, that's why he destroys the holocron. That you'd be putting those kids in incredible danger by pulling them together. But there were a couple of lines about, like, is it the best to kidnap children basically like that and not give them any agency or choice? And to me, it's Cal at least coming to that realization of, if the Jedi are to continue, it's not going to be in the same way.
Yeah, for sure. And, like, they've fulfilled their mission of getting the holocron away from the Inquisitors, right? So they've kept the children safe in that manner. But yeah, I think, like, he says, like, I don't remember the exact line, but, like, if they're meant to be Jedi, the Force will find them and lead them down that path. Like, we don't need to indoctrinate them, basically. Like, let go and let Force, basically.
So let's talk a bit more about kind of what else we learn about the world in this. I also really like that we're starting to see the early resistance against the Empire. I think sometimes it's easy to feel like, and here we can also talk about canon and how it applies. Like, originally it did seem like the Empire takes over, and then there's 20 years of just Imperial rule, and then this, like, rebellion starts to get started. And as more and more of these prequel stories are being told, we get more and more of a sense of that it never really ended, and that the sort of the people fighting against the Separatists or fighting just at some point in the Clone Wars, like, they didn't love the Empire to start with, and that the kind of the early resistance to that just kind of never stopped and continued the whole way until it becomes a rebellion. How did you all feel like getting to see, like, the fighting on Kashyyyk, the Wookiee home planet, and getting to see Saw Gerrera and all those parts of the sort of early resistance to the Empire?
Well, again, like, Forrest Whitaker, I can't get over that.
Yeah, I mean, Saw is still a giant butthole, but, like, yeah, I don't know. You made a face. You don't think he's a jerk?
I don't think he was in this game. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is this...
I mean, like, I don't think he was in this game. He didn't have like a huge role, but I mean, like he was a jerk in Clone Wars. He's a jerk in Rogue One. There we go. I got it. Therefore, the intermediate period, I feel like he would still be a jerk.
Yeah, but at this point, he's still like a very clean freedom fighter.
Right.
And then later on in storylines, he falls to down a darker path.
Okay, so is that all right? We see him in Rebels, right? Is Rebels after this?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Rebels is set 15 years after the Purge. This is set 5 years after the Purge. So yeah, this is a middle point between that and then Rogue One.
But he like H's down again. Okay, that's fine. All right. Yeah. Okay, I get you. I see what you're saying.
It's interesting. I'm not bothered by the I feel like when you go from live action to an actor, if you find an actor that doesn't look that much like the character but can really embody the sense of the character, I'm much more okay with that. But I think also I'm so not a visual person that I probably just don't pay enough attention to the way they look on screen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm fine with it in practice. It just like confused me a little timeline wise. But now that I know, we're good. That's fine.
And I think we need what we need to happen is for there to be like another 5 years from here where we see Saw again and he is a little bit more extreme.
Okay. Because going
to
from
fill in more of the gap.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I guess to me it feels like a natural progression because even when we met him in Clone Wars, he was willing to kind of take more extreme tactics than some others. And it's interesting you describe him as a jerk because I definitely feel like why, especially by Rogue One, he feels like that to some of our characters. To me, what I really see him as is the kind of idea of like, you know, when oppression is awful, it becomes really difficult to judge the way people fight oppression, you know? And then I think that there are tactics he uses where I definitely am more on the kind of Mon Mothma side than the Saw Gerrera side. But I also find it very hard to kind of sit in judgment of him because I can very much understand, like, with all that he's been through, where he's driven to and why he thinks, you know, especially because, like, and now we're talking more about his character itself, but, like, by the time of Rogue One, you know, the others aren't fighting as much as he is. So I just really liked seeing his character here and just this idea of that the fighting never really stops, you know, that it's not 20 years of Imperial rule and then a new civil war starts.
Yeah, and I think like Cal even says something about how like the war never ended on Kashyyyk.
Right.
Because they've just been like holed up there fighting the whole time, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and I liked. Yeah, I think we sure will have a lot more to say about Saw in Rebels as well.
Yeah, but it's also I do think that this 20-year period, a lot of it is kind of a holding pattern for the Empire. Mm-hmm. Because what happens in A New Hope is that they finish construction of the Death Star. Why did it take you so long?
It's a giant... It's the size of a moon. Come on.
But then the next one is built in 2.5 years? Anyway,
they already had the plans. They had the infrastructure in place.
So they finished construction of the Death Star, and then as soon as that happens, Palpatine dissolves the Senate. So It's like that's what they were waiting for to finish this descent into autocracy, is to have this weapon that could basically pacify any force against them. So I do think like there is going to be this period of the Empire just trying to act like the good guys and be like, hey, like, you know, like you talk about in the Bad Batch, hey, jobs.
Yeah. That it's only by then that they're like, okay, we tried the carrot, it didn't work. Now here's the death stick.
Yeah.
Or like, we're building the death stick, but we just want you to think we're passing out carrots.
Yeah, that works too. So that gets into my next question, and it may well be that this ship has sailed, and so continuing to be upset about it seems to make no sense. But I do feel like, and this is kind of a general critique I have about any kind of a prequel, but I feel like especially in the Star Wars universe, you know, we start out in A New Hope with what really feels to me this idea of like the Jedi are dead and gone. It's this ancient religion that Vader's connected to, and no one has any real connection to it anymore. No one's even heard of it anymore. And we keep seeing to be like, okay, but except for this one person. And this one other person, and this one other person. There's a part of me that sort of, at the end of it, it's like, okay, well, so now we have yet another Jedi who's running around in this period when the Jedi are all supposed to be gone. And then, of course, you also have to ask, why wasn't Cal, flying an X-Wing? Where was Cal in all this? And maybe it's because he and Seer get killed off in the next 15 years. But I'm just kind of curious to you all, like, is there a frustration of feeling like that we're just adding, like, more and more things to this intermediate period that don't seem to fit with the continuity of the later movies? Or is it just that we're already kind of accepted that with Rebels and stuff like that, that's changed, and who cares at this point?
I guess the way that I reconcile it is, like, the galaxy is very, very, very big. Mm-hmm. And so these stories are pretty myopic if you, like, think about them. Like, we get a lot of interrelationships with the same characters over and over. And, like, yeah, there's a few, like, new folks we find out about on the fringe of these groups. But they're all, like, circling the same general area. Whereas, like, the galaxy is so much more than just this little circle of Jedi and people who know about it. So I think, like, it's still believable to me that, like, I don't know, Joe every planet has like maybe heard of the Jedi, as like they used to be a part of the old Republic, but like then the Empire came and they're gone now. They were like a bunch of kooky mystics.
Right.
Who knows if they were even real? Whereas, like, continuing to get more and more, like, learn more about the folks who do know that the Jedi are real.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me that much.
That's fair. Riki, what about yourself?
You're talking about the scene on the Death Star, right? Where the Moff is telling Vader that he's, like, a part of an old religion and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, and that to me is that's not Joe any planet. That's the guy who, in theory, now has been fighting alongside Inquisitors 3 years ago. So it just doesn't make as much sense. But I think, like, the religion is gone. Mm-hmm. Like, you think about religion in our world. I mean, we live in Virginia, and there's a church seemingly, like, on every street corner. Right. And if, the Jedi purge, like, I don't know, 99% of them were wiped out. If we go down to 1%, like, how many churches are you going to see? Right. And also, like, I was thinking about what you said about Rebels, right? Because Kanan and Ezra end up being instrumental in the foundation of the rebellion, right, which leads into A New Hope. Like, they participate in a lot of these early battles. So yeah, you would think, like, people like Mon Mothma, and I think General Dodonna is in Rebels maybe, that these people would be like, oh, like, Luke's another Jedi, like those folks. Mm-hmm. But it's also possible that the way, that the rebellion is set up, it's probably set up like resistance cells, right? Where each cell only communicates with, like, one other cell. Right. So you don't know what everyone else is doing. You just know what your contact is doing. And so they're not gonna be telling stories about, oh, like, we've got Jedi over here on Lothal. Mm-hmm. And especially, like, even if you do know, you're not going to go telling people because the Empire has been hunting and killing Jedi. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, it also kind of gets back to what we were saying about Jedi, the religion, versus Jedi, the individual. Mm-hmm. And this idea that, like, the Jedi Order as this institution is gone, but, like, just having an individual Jedi, like, maybe looks different. Like, even if we just look at Cal and Seer, right? And even, Malicos. Like, they don't look like Jedi in the way that we've associated them in the past. Yeah, like, they have a robes. Lightsaber, but that's the only thing. Yeah, like, they don't have the robes. They're not...
braided hair.
Exactly. Yeah, they've sort of lost the trappings of a Jedi that, like, if you saw someone walking in, like, monk's robes down the street, you'd be like, hey, there's a monk. Whereas, right, like, if you just saw, like, a person walking down and they're like, I believe in this monastic theories, and I don't, you'd be like, all right, whatevs, that's fun, and, like, maybe not associated as much. I don't know.
I can hear all that, and I think to some extent I am holding on to my own version of the ancient religion, which is the canon of the original New Hope. That, to be frank, I mean, they started breaking that in the prequels. Yeah. I feel like that the ship of accepting the way the Jedi were in the years before New Hope is now. They've been working on this for 30 years. Mm-hmm. I guess to me, though, the other thing is, and I'm curious how you would see it, is now more this question of, if Cal is still alive at this point, why, like I said, why isn't he flying an X-Wing? And here I'm going to say something very spoilerish about Rebels. So if you haven't seen that, skip ahead a minute or two. So 3, 2, 1. To me, the very last scenes of Rebels, the last episode, one of the things they have to do is explain why Ezra didn't take part in the rebellion against the Empire of the original movies. And I feel like that the way that they do it, of him being like him and Thrawn are, kidnapped by space whales kind of thing, it feels so contrived that I guess it's why I'm also sort of super sensitive to now this question of like, why isn't Cal around? To me, unless in one of these sequels you wind up showing him dying, you now have this other like, okay, so we have this other awesomely powerful person. Why wasn't he involved? Why wasn't he hanging out with Mon Mothma or any of these people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how awesomely powerful Cal is, I guess. Like, especially with his, like, breaking the holocron at the end of the game, too. Like, maybe we'll get a sequel game, and he'll be in there super powerful. But I don't know. Like, I could believe that Cal just sort of goes to working quietly behind the scenes after this. Or maybe, like, goes and, like, tries to seek out some Force-sensitive kids and just, like, talk to them or something like that.
Yeah. Or maybe his personal mission is to take out Inquisitors, and that's why we don't see Inquisitors in the A New Hope.
Two birds, one stone.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like, especially in Empire and then Return of the Jedi, like, Obi-Wan and Yoda make such a big deal about how Luke is like that, the rebellion needs a Jedi and that Luke is the last hope, or that maybe Leia's the last hope. And again, maybe I'm just holding on to those too tightly. I just feel like if we're also supposed to believe that there are these other Jedi running around, it just, to me, it undercuts the power of that quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, I think, the problem with prequels and, like, delving so deeply into this universe is that, like, you're gonna contradict the thing that came out in 1977. Yeah. 40-some years later, right? Like,
But they're also caught up in the idea of the prophecy and the idea of, the all-powerful Skywalker.
Like, balance to the Force and all that. Yeah.
So I think they are trying to reconcile with, why were we wrong about Anakin?
Right.
Maybe the prophecy is about Luke.
Oh, you're talking specifically Obi-Wan and Yoda.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can hear that, and I think, like, as a logical understanding of the story, that makes sense. But to me, if the central tension of those movies is so much of this, like, they believe, and so the audience believes that he is the last hope, learning that actually, no, he wasn't really the last hope, because, like, Grogu was out there, and Kanan was out there, and all, Cal was out there. It just, to me, it undercuts those movies quite a lot. But you're right. I think, Sarah, what you said about this is the danger of prequels, and frankly, it's why I think I'm so interested in things like The Bad Batch and Rogue One, because we're getting the stories that are so far below the headlines that they feel like they're important stories, but that nothing in the stories is going to happen that's going to be big enough to change the later stuff.
In fact, there's actually a scene in Rebels that all but confirms what I just said. And I'm not going to be spoilery about it.
Yeah. No, and I got very mad at that scene. So we'll talk about it when we get to Rebels.
What? That's like the best scene.
I forget what scene we're talking about. Right. So
we'll talk about it afterwards.
We'll get there soon.
Because I don't want you to skip ahead, listener. Yeah. Keep on keeping on.
For sure. We're going to be talking about Rebels as soon as Bad Batch ends.
I want to reset and talk about the Zepho. Because they are... So, Cordova, the Jedi Master...
I'm sorry, I yawned. What were you saying? What? I was so bored by the Zepho.
Okay, but it's like everything you love to talk about the Jedi. Mm-hmm. So the Zepho is an ancient race that used the Force, and Cordova, the Jedi Master, was investigating like their ruins and artifacts across the galaxy and following these clues to figure out what happened to the Zepho. And it turns out the Zepho fell to the dark side. They had like their own version of Palpatine who like took over and killed a bunch of people. And then they got rid of him and basically left the galaxy. They're like, we've done so much damage, we have to leave. And that's why they're gone. And then all of these artifacts and ruins are left on these planets, and that's what they're investigating. So it's like this parallel storyline to the Jedi that also ends in the way that I kind of wanted the Rise of Skywalker to end.
Everyone just like peace out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we've done so much damage to this galaxy, like we should leave.
We're done.
No, we should get married and go farm moisture.
That's a
together.
bad occupation. I read the Obi-Wan book. It's not profitable.
It really is
There's
not.
no money in moisture.
No.
It's a great book, but it's not a good occupation. Well, so in a bit, I want you to give you more time to talk about the storyline of the Zepho. What I'm going to say is going to introduce my thoughts on introducing a story like this in a game. I had literally no idea of any of that because...
But it's all told in the game.
Not really. Because it is not in any way directly relevant to the plot of the game. And the way the game plays out, you can finish the plot of the story, and then there's all these kind of like, you can spend like far, far more time going much deeper to explore the world and finding all these little artifacts that tell you that story in a very inconvenient kind of like, you have to keep pushing buttons to go back and forth between different journal things. And like, I was amazed to realize by the time they got at the end of the story that I'd only actually like played like 30 or 40% of the game because of the way the game's set up. So I have honestly, that makes me a lot more angry about the game because I would have loved to have gotten that story. But like, because it's not in any way relevant to the game itself, it's just 100% flavor, and you can complete all the missions without doing any of that, or without really even being pushed to do that. I missed this out entirely. So yeah, I'd love to hear you two talk more about what you liked about the Zepho, and because it sounds like a great story and a wonderful parallel to this.
What? Gotta read the notes.
But you gotta find the notes.
One of the things about us watching video games like on YouTube, like walkthroughs, is I get very annoyed when people playing the game don't read the notes and just like click through or don't even like pick them up. Because they're very important for the story, and like the creators of the game have taken this time to weave this story like in the background of this game. Right. That if you take the time to read everything, I feel like it enriches the experience that much more.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And I just want to make clear that I agree with that. What I'm saying is that the way the playability of it's structured, you have to be a much better gamer in order to get to find those notes. Like, there's a lot of notes where you have to be like, you can jump in this perfect way to get to this thing that you don't have to do for the sake of the plot, and you have no, like, it's not like I kept walking past all these notes and just saying, don't bother. I literally had no idea they were all there until I got to the end of the game, and I was like, oh yeah, you only completed 30%. I was like, I missed that entirely. So, anyway, yeah, but now go back to that. I just wanted to make that clear. Go ahead.
Well, that's part of, I think, the intentional game design these days, is that you can finish a game and get to an ending and not really get the full experience, and they are encouraging you to play it again.
Right.
Yeah, and lots of games will have, like, once you get through it, you can go back and play a different mode. Like, you unlock special modes where you
branching
have, like, paths where you have, like, infinite ammo now.
Right.
Not applicable for Star Wars, obviously, but yeah, so it's like, yeah, that's sort of encouraging you to replay. So I think, like, part of it's probably marketing, right? So that you don't get angry that you spent $80 on a video game and it's over in a day. Right. But yeah, I definitely could see how that would be frustrating. I just want to, like, I guess, come to the defense of the YouTuber who we watched play through this. There's just, again, the Rad Brad. Yeah. Shout out. And yeah, like, if a note shows up on the screen, he just, like, skips over it a lot of the times. But I think that's more of a...
He was reading it this time. For Resident Evil.
For Resident Evil, he was. Yeah. In Fallen Order, he didn't a lot. Okay. But I think Fallen Order also has a lot of, like, weird words, right? There's a lot of fun and interesting names with lots of vowels. And true. Like, I'm not especially comfortable, like, reading something out loud in front of an audience in the first go. Yeah. So I understand him just, like, popping it up there and being like, if you want to read this, pause the video, go nuts. I'm going to move on and keep playing.
Well, but also, I think in this game, a lot of the lore is told visually. I mean, not by like notes that you read, but Eno Cordova himself has like recordings within BD that are unlocked when you reach certain places.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't realize that was optional because like we didn't actually do it. So it seemed like an extension of the game that we were watching.
Well, and so obviously I think that can lead us into a conversation, the last kind of topic I wanted to get into, which is the idea of telling a canonical story through this video game medium. But first I just want to say, like, is there more about the Zepho story itself we wanted to discuss?
Well, I mean, I basically told the story.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it adds to the overall lore of Star Wars to have other Force-using races and organizations that preceded the Jedi.
Definitely.
Yeah, like we already talked about the Night Sisters a little bit. I think there's some things in Rebels too. We get the idea of like other species being Force sensitive as well.
Well, especially because by the end of this, one of the former Night Sisters, like when we talked about the Night Sisters in the Clone Wars, I think we got really into this idea of the Night Sisters as Force users who are neither Jedi nor Sith, but they're certainly mostly antagonists. And by the end of this, one of the last living Night Sisters has basically joined the Scooby Gang. Like, she's on the ship with them, and seems like she's going to be a protagonist and not an antagonist in the next game. Yeah,
Miri? I forget her name.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's interesting, especially seeing her interaction with Malicos, who's the Jedi who set up shop on Dathomir. Mm-hmm. And like she seemed to she initially is very hostile towards Cal in a like boo Jedi sense,
right?
And then once it's revealed that Malicos was a Jedi, she indicates that like you told me that all the Jedi were evil and that they were responsible.
Yeah, Malicos lied to her and said that the Jedi were responsible for the massacre of Dathomir, which we saw in Clone Wars was carried out by Grievous. And she actually mentions Grievous as like this metal, this machine wielding lightsabers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think having her come to the realization that like she's been lied to, and then joining up with, as you call them, the Scoobies, I think was neat to see them. Because, I mean, I don't know. As much as we love Ventress, she's definitely not a good guy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, seeing a Night Sister who is, this sort of light side using Force user, who's I mean, and they still refer to it as magic with a K in this in Fallen Order, same way that they do in Clone Wars, right? Mm-hmm. They're very much like a witchy sort of brood. Well, I guess it's just her on Dathomir, right? It's her and then some zombie sisters.
She says that she's the last one.
But there might be some others like scattered throughout the galaxy.
I mean, clearly, as we've established, when someone says you're the last one, that doesn't have to mean anything.
That doesn't necessarily mean it. Yeah, she's the last one on Dathomir, and there's like an asterisk. But yeah, so I think this idea of having yet another like race using the Force is just really super interesting, and like Riki was saying, that sort of parallel storyline is nice. It's fun.
Yeah, that makes sense. And honestly, I mean, I'm now going to try and go back and try to maybe watch some of those cutscenes about the Zepho, because and let's take this time now to move into that kind of last question, because I have a bit of a rant, and then I want to hear your thoughts as well, though. For me, at first when I heard that this video game story was canonical, I was like, okay, that sounds really awesome. I think I quickly found it very frustrating because, and I said, I'm not the best gamer. You know, I'm good at RPGs and things like that. And I got my way through Squadrons, which is another fun game. It has some fun story. But generally when I play games like that, I play it on, story mode, where the assumption is kind of like that if you press the right buttons in a somewhat decent like timing, you're going to be able to survive the story. And there's not going to be many huge challenges, because the real point of it is that you get to play out the story and experience the whole story without having to be like all the sort of hand-eye coordination of the like, the video games I grew up on, like Pac-Man and all that kind of stuff, or Super Mario Brothers. You needed to have perfect hand-eye coordination to like get through the game. And I've loved this whole genre of like RPGs where it's much more about the story. This is not that kind of game. It's a platformer, and you have to be able to like jump and, read the room and see the walls and see the ropes exactly where they are and time everything perfectly. And that's not my style of game, but I'm very glad people enjoy that kind of game, and apparently this is a very good version of that kind of game. I found it, though, very frustrating, this idea that there was a part of the story of this larger universe that it was entirely possible I couldn't access unless I had really good hand-eye coordination for a video game. And, I know that you can go back and you watch the videos, and I think for some people that's a possibility. For others, I tried doing that with the Arkham Knight games, because similarly, I just couldn't get through some of those games. And it's very stilted. It's very, jumping back and forth. It's hard to follow sometimes. And so I guess I don't love the idea that we're going to have major parts of the story, especially if now, like, Cal shows up sometimes, that are told in a medium that can be fairly inaccessible. And I think I was already feeling that, but honestly, what you just told me about the Zepho makes me feel that much more so, because, like, I think it's one, like, if every one of those parts of the Zepho story had been right in front of you, and you just have to, you can choose not to read it or to read it, I think it's one thing. But the fact that you have to go very out of your way and be much more a 100% completionist, even when completing that stuff is very, very, like, just physically hand-eye coordination difficult, being able to play through the whole game and miss an entire part of the story like you're talking about, I just don't love the idea that that's how we're telling what's supposed to be canonical stories. That's my rant, and I'm kind of curious for you all, especially as people who may interact a lot more with video games, what your perspective on it is.
I don't feel as impassioned as you do, I guess. I mean, like, we didn't play the video game, right? Like, we just watched it, and I feel like still got just as much out of the story. And, like, it's definitely a much bigger time commitment than, like, sitting down to watch a movie, but I mean, it's also free on YouTube, right? Like, I didn't have to invest into the video game and then play it. I could just, like, sit and watch TV, basically. So I felt like it was just as accessible as someone who is also like quite bad at video games. I don't know. I think, like, the idea of telling canonical stories through video games is interesting, and I like it. And this idea that, like, not everything is going to be for everyone as well. Like,
that's fair.
I know that there's, like, a lot of canon story being told in the novels as well. And, like, unless those novels come out as, like, book on tape, I'm probably never going to read them. Right. Just because, like, I'm fairly dyslexic, and, like, reading novels for fun isn't really a thing that I do much anymore.
That's legit.
But yeah, I think if there were, like, if they somehow, like, if EA for some reason, like, banned playthroughs of this being put up on YouTube or something like that, then I would definitely feel as like upset as you do, I guess, that like the fact that I have to buy an $80 video game and be able to play it to get the story. But the like, there's, I don't know, I enjoy the workarounds, I guess.
That's
Riki?
fair.
I have a lot of feelings about video games and video game storytelling. I think they are very rich and deep. I've talked a lot about Resident Evil. Silent Hill is another franchise that has told some amazing stories in their games.
Definitely.
And has a depth of lore that it is, quite frankly, just, like, very startling and just makes me desire more. And I compare that to the movie series of both Silent Hill and Resident Evil, which are absolute garbage.
Yes.
So you cannot convince me that, somehow movies are a better format for telling these stories than video games.
Oh, and let me be very clear. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think the Final Fantasy stories that I've played through those video games are fantastic stories. I think I've gotten to watch my partner play through a number of video games and are fantastic stories. To me, if this was more like, but the thing is, like, I can get through Final Fantasy because you put it on easy mode, and there really is never going to be anything that's so challenging that I hit a point where I literally can't keep going unless I find someone else to press the right buttons at the right time. To me, it's that it felt like this particular form of video game was much less accessible, and I wish there had been a true story mode. Like, to me, if there's just a true story mode where you're going to be able to overcome all the challenges, it just might take a little longer. You might have to do a boss fight a couple more times. but you're going to be able to experience all the parts of that story, then I think I'd be fine. And I think in some ways it's because of what you're talking about that I'm more disappointed by this, because I think you're right. Storytelling through video games is fantastic, and I would love to see Star Wars do it more. I think they can be incredibly rich stories. I just wish that it was in a more accessible gaming format.
Yeah, just like have an easy mode, basically.
Yeah. And there is an easy mode, but it's like, I mean, like a lot of the game reviewers talk about, like, the easy mode of this game is still very hard.
Well, I mean, that's a potential balance issue for the game designers. And right. I will just, in general, say that I know there are certain people out there who are upset that there are easy modes of games, and you can just go off.
Yeah.
Because, as we're having this discussion with you, Matthew, like, it's important that games are accessible to different skill levels of people. So, again, like, I don't know the specifics of what parts you were struggling with and what, the different modes of the game change the difficulties. So I cannot really speak to whether it's too hard or too easy.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, like, there should be a base level that, anyone should be able to pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a recent game, I totally forget what it was, but it only offered like a hard or like hardest mode.
Yeah, that's just...
Yeah, and I think people were saying like you should give us like at least a standard mode, because then I can play it. And then there was some talk about like, well, the designers didn't intend like they intended for it to be difficult.
Right. That's such needless ego stroking.
And that's just
gamers.
Exactly. That's just dumb. That's just excluding a large.
If you want it to be harder and like there's a harder mode, that's great. And I know, like, I have watched some playthroughs of people who love playing on like the nightmare mode with 0 damage, and all that, and like it's very impressive to watch.
Oh, and
I think that's a skill level that a lot of gamers aspire to. But I'm just here for the story.
Yeah. Having an easy mode that is accessible to like folks like us, Matthew, who cannot play video games. Not to say that you can't, but I feel like we're on like a similar level where I cannot do platformers. My hand-eye coordination is terrible. Having a mode where like give me let me push a button and give me a real wide window as to when it's acceptable to push said button.
Yeah.
And this game, having never actually like had a controller in my hands controlling Cal Kestis, even just from watching, I can tell that this game is a degree of difficulty harder than other platformers because of the open world nature and the fact that you can actually fall off of things.
Yes.
A lot of other games like this have, barriers. Even though there's a cliff, like you can't actually walk off the cliff.
Right.
You could
because it's not not part of the storyline. But here, like, there are cliffs, there are parts where you have to do like the Jedi wall run, and if you do it incorrectly or time it wrong, you'll just fall.
Yeah.
But at least it just resets you to like, where you were just previously standing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I could. Oh man, so this is a weird tangent. There's 2 games that I recently watched people play on YouTube from my childhood that I could not get past. One is like a Nancy Drew computer game from like 2001, 2002, where there was just like, I was just too young for it. And there was like a puzzle that I straight up couldn't solve. And it was a timing thing where you had to go and like click a gas line and then run out of a room and click something else. And so I was just like, it popped up and I was like, oh, that's how you do that thing. And then another was Super Mario Sunshine, which ostensibly is a game for children. And I remember my sister and I struggling. There was one section where you had to like spray a bunch of slime in a certain amount of time. And we just couldn't do it. And we could never get past that one part in the story, no matter like how many strategy guides we bought. Because this is pre-internet. Well, or like pre us having good access on the internet. Anyway. Yeah, and it was super, super frustrating. And so I could definitely see how if there was, like, canonical story in, like, the Super Mario world past this one level, and I just could not get through it, being frustrated with it, and then, like, getting angry about that. Like, I get real frustrated at video games real easy.
Yeah.
And I think it would, like, sour my experience. So, yeah, I mean...
And that's part of why we do podcasts like this, because I suppose what we said about the novels, like we're doing a Star Wars book club for people who want to know what that story is, but just don't want to read the novels. And I do like what Star Wars is doing of just putting canon everywhere, because I think they're going to be pretty good about, like, I can't imagine there will be a movie where Cal is such an important character and his backstory matters so much that if you haven't played the game, you have no idea what's going on in the movie. Like, they're clearly never going to do that. But yeah, I'm glad we can understand each other there, because I definitely agree, and I like what both of you are saying about kind of help reminding me that we can have stories being told through video games that can be really deep and really add so much to the universe by putting you in the position of that character, letting you experience it instead of just reading about it or watching someone else do it. But yeah, I just think it's the accessibility issue that really matters here. So I think that's kind of all I had. We've gone on quite a while now, but are there any other kind of last comments either you want to make or last questions to bring up?
Oh, I threatened to go off about the gladiatorial battle. And I'm going to briefly do so.
Go for it.
What the heck? So when that came up in the playthrough that we'd watched, I was like...
For those who haven't watched or played through, can you give it a 30-second explanation?
Sure. Can I? You're fighting the second sister, and she's like, haha, I'm Trilla. And then you get, like, abducted, and you wake up in a jail cell without BD1, and you're like, where am I? And there's some people talking in a language you don't understand, and it turns out you're in some sort of gladiatorial pit because Grease lost a bet? ? And then you have to, like, fight a bunch of monsters, and then Grease and Seer come and rescue you.
It's very much like Sakaar from Thor Ragnarok. It's like a Grandmaster vibe.
Yeah, but it just, like, it seems so thrown in the middle.
Oh, it was.
For no reason. Like, I felt that the Rad Brad had, like, died, and this is why we got this, like, retraining round where it's like, okay, you did bad, so we're gonna throw you into this pit so you can learn how to fight good again, and then we're gonna go. But, like, no, that's just how the story goes.
Sometimes you just have to add levels.
But it's just, like, such a weird... Yeah. It just felt so weird and out of place.
And I felt really I wanted to like the character of Grieve a lot more, because he's supposed to be kind of... In some ways, he's actually a great character because he's just the guy trying to make a living in this crazy world where the political structure keeps changing around him. And he's like, he doesn't love the Empire, but also the Republic wasn't that great either, and the Clone Wars were terrible. And he's like, he comes to believe in the cause we're fighting for, but he kind of has that attitude of like, I just would rather like keep my head down. And to me, that's a helpful attitude to see that like, that's part of how the Empire survives, is that some people are just like, we're just done after the Clone Wars. We don't want to keep fighting every day. But yeah, then they do, like, they can't quite find the line of, is he kind of the lovable scamp who will do some, like, little bit shady things, but not terrible? Or who will he literally sell you into a gladiatorial combat? Because that, to me, is, like, that's not lovable scamp behavior. That's crossing a line.
He apologized.
He apologized. It's fine. Well, I mean, it seems like he lost a bet. Like, he didn't intentionally sell Cal, but still, he bet Cal in the first place, which is bad.
I think it might have been like a Han situation where his debts had gotten too high.
Right. So they just like took... Yeah, it's so weird. And I really like Grease. I especially like his easy greasy phrase. Mm-hmm. That's adorable and wonderful. And yeah, he feels like the crotchety uncle who's like begrudgingly... Like, he loves you, but he's never going to say it.
Yep.
But yeah, it just... The idea of him, like, his gambling debts must be paid.
Exactly.
So, yeah, so strange.
Yeah.
So I have two things.
Okay.
One, the wind mechanics in the cutscenes are really weird. So... Don't look too closely at people's hair.
Yep.
Two, on Braca, the second sister arrives in a TIE interceptor. Which should not be developed for like another 10 to 15 years. Because it was actually Darth Vader's TIE Advanced that was the prototype that led to the development of the TIE Interceptor.
Right.
Nerd.
Yep, I am. We notice these things.
Deep continuity is an important thing, you got to pay attention to these things. Well, guys, this was a great conversation. I'm so glad we got to have it. To our listeners, what do you all think? Would love to hear your thoughts. You can find us on... all of my podcasts are under The Ethical Panda, so you can go to The Ethical Panda on Facebook or Twitter, or email us at theethicalpanda@gmail.com. Would love to hear what you have to say. As I said, right now we're doing Star Wars podcasts every week on the Bad Batch as every episode comes out. If you've got some time on a Friday morning and you're going to watch that episode right when it comes out, or the night before, or right that morning, and you want to then live talk to us about it, hop on Twitch TV, Stranded Panda, and talk to us there. every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time. And, of course, also that podcast will then be out hopefully on Fridays. Sometimes it comes out more like Saturday or Sunday, depending on how much editing it needs done. I had a big snafu last week, so that's why I got delayed for a while, and why there was a little bit of... You might have heard Sarah's voice in triplicate from time to time. That was on me. But,
that's just me.
It's the voice of wisdom rings out.
Yes.
So definitely check all that out, and check out the Animation Deliberation podcast, which is the one we're partnering with. They just did a great run on the TV show Invincible, which is a very good animated, very intense, like gruesome, bloody show, which I didn't think animation could make me look away the way Kill Bill had, but it goes there, which I don't love, but it's still a great story. And you can find them, as well as so many other great podcasts, on the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. If you go to strandedpanda.com, there you'll find podcasts about the MCU, Star Wars, Star Trek, things where we're talking about the Godzilla vs. Kong universe. There's going to be stuff on the Fast and Furious coming up soon. If it's stuff that geeks like...
Get me on for that.
I know, yeah. I'm super excited for those. So we'll get into it there. So on behalf of myself, Riki, Sarah, thank you all so much for listening, and have a great day.
Padawan Kestis.
Padawan Kestis.
I like it.